Drikkie Botha. Good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are in the world. I've heard that said 1,000 times. You, sir, are uh, somewhat of, and you are the worst kind of promoter of self, but you started a journey that dials back to the early 1980s with some kind of weird fascination for a style of music that you wanted to play. And then, weirdly, in a small town, well, city um, of Pretoria in deepest, darkest Africa, you formed a band called The Gathering. What was the motivation?
That's a weird question, Jason. Um, Look, I mean, you have to realize that the first album I ever bought when I was, in my teens, 13 or 14, was Joy Division's Closer, which is kind of a weird one for a kid of that age. But I had neighbors that lived across the street that were like 5, 6 years older than me. So they came out of the punk scene and, took a liking to me. I don't know why. But they could see that I listened to different kind of music. So I went over and borrowed some of their records, and I remember it was weird stuff, man. It was like Ultravox, Pre-Major, Gary Newman, the Two Boy Army stuff. They had the Clash, and then they started taking me to record stores with them because they were 18, 19, and I was like 13 or 14. Hillbrow Records,
Yep,
in the early 80s,
institution.
was still, you could still go there without worrying about being shot and shit like that. So, like,
I
once a
really miss
week, we
those
would,
days. Yeah.
exactly. So you would go. And you also have to realize at that time, with the Rand being so strong, you could buy a record for like 8, $9.
Hmm.
So being 13 or 14 and having a small allowance, I could buy like 2 or 3 records a week.
Yeah.
So I started just buying that stuff, and then I must have been like when I found Susie and the Banshees and Bauhaus. I realized, you know what, I like this post-punk slash goth stuff,
Hmm.
and I always listened to it, and then never, started a little school band with my two best friends, and we played like really strange Cabaret Voltaire type stuff. And then went to university, and then I know Oliver at that time was at university as well, but never met him until my second year. So we're talking about like 87,
Okay.
88. And then started a little band with my sister and one of the friends. And we actually, my first ever gig was playing with Pete Botha.
No
Botha.
ways. Really? I was talking about him today.
Yeah, yeah. I think my dad kind of knew him. So my dad actually asked him if this little band of mine could open for Jackhammer at, that place right by the State Theater in
Yep, yep.
Pretoria. What was
Yeah. What was it
it?
called? So
Exactly.
it was like a sailor's bar. It was very,
Yeah, it was great. So at that gig, because I promoted it a little bit at university, Oliver was at that gig. And
okay.
I knew this first band of mine wasn't going to go anywhere and
What were
whatever.
they called?
So Cults, Kultz. It
Come
was
on. Yeah, that's lazy. Just saying.
no, no, no. But it was spelled with a K, and it was actually out of 2000 AD or an Epic magazine. There was
No,
like a little story
that's
called.
not like you at all. Yes.
Well, remember at that time I was so completely nerd that I was reading comics,
And you
and
still are.
still.
And you still are.
Yeah, don't mention that. But yeah, I still have comics from that time. So it was like a science fiction type thing,
Hmm.
because like I said, at that time I was very into electronic music.
Hmm.
I I didn't really play guitar or anything until I was like 18 or 19.
Yeah.
And then Oliver and myself became friends, and he had a band at that point, actually a really cool band called Pillar of Fate.
Hmm.
And I remember their first gig, I sat in, they didn't have a drummer, so I played drums for them. It was at my house, and we actually still have a recording of that. And shortly after that, in '88, I went to England for about a month. Came back with a bunch of videotapes and new records, and a lot of goth stuff. And I remember we sat at my house watching this stuff, and I said, Oliver, we could do this. This is not hard, and I kind of like this.
Mm.
A month later, we had the gathering. We were looking for a drummer. Bunty showed up. She was playing keyboards. And we said, well, that's great, but we need a drummer. And she goes, give me 2 weeks. Her boyfriend at that time was a drummer. She
Yeah.
went, got a drum kit, and learned to play drums in 2 weeks.
See,
She was just,
well,
she's a brilliant musician, right? So 3 months after all of this, we got our first gig through a girlfriend of mine that was our manager at that time. She just called Barney Simon up, said, hey, there's this band in Pretoria playing goth stuff. What's up? He hooked us up with the Psycho Reptiles.
yeah.
And our first gig was supporting the Psycho Reptiles at one of the Joburg clubs.
At a time that they were pretty
Just coming up, right? They were just coming up.
yeah.
They were just about to release their first album. Really nice people, nice guys. I still am friends with Mike Seal.
Mm.
He's in, I think they're all living in England.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I think after that, they were going to record like a compilation album, In From the Cold.
Mm.
And I think we only had like 8 or 9 songs, and we were chosen for this. So within 6 months of forming the gathering, we were in the studio and had no idea what we were doing. I have to tell you, the In From the Cold sessions to us personally weren't that nice because, we were treated as kids. I think I was only, 19 or 20. Oliver might have been 21.
Yeah.
Bunty might have been 22. My sister was still like 18.
Yeah.
So, but it worked out well. The video did well, and that's how it all started. I mean, from start to recording In From the Cold was probably 6 or 7 months.
Yeah.
There was just this gap left in the South African industry where alternative music was only really pushed by like 2 or 3 DJs.
Yeah.
They didn't understand kids that were listening to it. And I mean, we never played a gig where there weren't people. I mean, we were just lucky. Right time, right place, I think, Jason.
And then the thing is that, any fan of the gathering, remembers, Perfect Souls, remembers, that's kind of the standout moment. And then if you look at it as a stamp in time, you were there, you did extraordinary things in an extraordinarily short period of time, and then you were gone. And I think a lot of people were left going, what happened? What was, you were headed in such a good direction.
Yeah,
Take us through what happened after that.
Yeah. Well, the In From the Cold album came out, and it did really well. I mean, we're talking about, what was that, 88? And I know Barney, Simon, Neil Johnson, those guys all played it on the radio, and it was doing well. And we were playing really good gigs. And then I think the Flying Circus album, where we did Stricken came out.
Yeah.
We did a short tour, all the major things. And then I don't know, to tell you the truth. I mean, we did sign short-term record deals, like for one-offs.
Yeah.
With certain companies. Then I think, and to tell you the truth, you have to realize at that point, myself and Oliver and Bunty and my sister were all full-time students. I mean, I was working on my archaeology degree. Ollie was, I think he was in law at that time and then changed over to computers. Bunty was doing something. My sister just started. So the gathering, although it was like really important to us, we still had to get through university, which I finished in '89, just before the Outsiders.
Yeah.
Oliver never stopped. He finished. Bunty never stopped. We recorded one single after Flying Circus independently, which was it's like a limited edition single, which will obviously be re-released. And then, it was just a question of, we were in our teens and early 20s, Jason, and the South African record industry at that time, you have to realize, and I don't know if it's still like that, was run by, baby boomers that had no fucking idea what we were doing.
Yeah. Or
Okay.
understood it. Yeah.
Like they had no idea. I mean, their idea of a great band was, Little Sister,
Yeah.
which we girls, and I liked them. They were very nice people, but 90% of their repertoire was cover versions.
Yeah.
And they had one or two like nice hits, like pop hits. So that, and at that point, what, Mango Groove was like a big thing at that point.
Yeah.
And we played some festivals where we were on there as well. Now, can you imagine? You have the Gathering playing before Mango Groove, or No Friends at Home playing before Little Sister. I mean, it was just such a hodgepodge of, like, there was no direction where the record companies went. Like in England, what they did, they had the independents,
Yes.
where they actually put these bands on a bill together.
Yes.
Now, don't know what Barney's doing at the moment. At that point, he was trying to do that. Yes. By getting all these bands to at least play at the same festival and whatever.
Yeah.
And give him props for that. That was a good idea. But I don't think he had the full backing of the people with money at the record companies.
Oh no, definitely not.
Which we found out later when the Outsiders signed to another record company and got totally fucked there. But
that's part two of this conversation, and
yeah,
a much more animated one.
No, I know, and the Outsiders' first record company, Inhouse Records, was a independent.
Yeah,
and
really independent.
To this day, I almost think that it would have been better for us to have stayed with that. Yeah. But ambition, and unfortunately, when I got older and realized that this could make money and the band could get more popular, I made that mistake of going from a small independent to a larger independent, who didn't really have our best interest in mind.
No, and I think both of the labels, bless their cotton socks, certainly the former was more informed, but the latter, just didn't care. But we'll save that for next time. But so you have this journey, you have this experience with this band, you've tasted a level of success, yes, independently and kind of very fringe, niche, call it what you will. So you if there had been a bug, the bug had bitten. So you dissolve the Gathering with a body of work that now finally you've well, in the last couple of years, you've been working on and literally dusting off recordings that in some cases have never been heard commercially, almost because, based on the fact that there, as you say, you never played to an empty room. There were always people there, and the music was fundamentally worthy of the accolades that it enjoyed. So now we start this journey of compiling and presenting what never happened back in the day. There was never a finished record. And, fast track, you do the maths. God, it's probably is, going on 40
years.
Yeah, 40 years later. You've had the opportunity to work with some serious legacy people with remastering and, well, rather remixing some of those original tracks just to get them up to speed. But I know what the motivation is, but what is, from your perspective, other than wanting to own the complete works of the Gathering, of putting this basically debut album 40 years later
Yeah.
out?
Well, like you said, I mean, for me, Jason, you started off the conversation. I've never been a great self-promoter. I always believe that
You
when
suck
you
at that.
release,
Let's just
yeah,
put that out
well, no, I do, and the thing is, it's not about me. It's about the people that I work with and the combination of people.
there.
When
Absolutely.
you, I've only ever been in 3 bands in my whole life, right? The Gathering was one, The Outsiders was one, and I had a band here in America like 10, 15 years ago where we released 2 albums. I
Can I
always
correct
wanted,
you? Can I correct you? There was a
yeah.
fourth.
Well, I'm talking about bands that played live,
Okay.
right? I'm not talking about, you know,
The
fucking
Doubtful
around. I
Joy.
mean,
Come on, you can't forget
no,
about
no,
the
I
Doubtful
know,
Joy.
but we never played live, and it was an
I'm joking.
outsiders thing that.
I'm joking.
And I can put another one in there. I mean, I actually had a little um, band in the early 2000s before Vent that was myself, 2 guys here, and Les Warner from the Cult played drums
Yeah.
for us, and we
Yeah.
actually played a couple of gigs. Les is an awesome drummer. I mean, I've played with some people here in the States that it's not bad, but again, because it never went anywhere, I'm not gonna talk about that shit. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm sure people have played with or jammed with people that are way more famous than the people I've
Yeah,
played.
but it is part of your story. It is part of your
Yeah, it's part
journey.
of my story, but it's not something that
Yeah,
I.
but it has informed where we
Yeah,
are
no, I
today.
know,
You know what I
but I
mean?
mean the three bands that I put some serious work into were those three. I mean, the Gathering, we were together for less than 2 years from start to finish. Um, I'm sure there are more songs that we recorded than the 6 or 7 we'll release. Um, the release for me is purely just to almost end a chapter in my life that was left open because I've always loved goth music. I mean, it's one of my favorite genres. I think it's like the post-punk era, probably a very important part of music history, which people are now starting to realize. You know, you look at what's going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is a big wank, just
Mm,
like the Oscars and whatever. But they're starting to realize that, bands like Depeche Mode, bands like Duran Duran, Talking Heads went in earlier, Clash obviously went in
mm,
earlier. Those bands changed music.
yeah,
It wasn't the wank bands of, the glam metal of the late
yeah,
80s. It was
yeah.
what happened after that and before that.
So
I think once The Cure went into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, all bets were off.
that is
Because, I
true.
mean, that guy's been making music for 50 years that's as good as anything that's ever been made.
Yeah. So
Um,
so so would you say that the gathering's demise was premature, that it
oh,
could have, should
absolutely.
have?
Yeah. I think if The Gathering had uh, some sort of support, or we were a bit older, like if we had a manager, if we had a record company like a Some Bazaar or a Factory or a Mute
If you had a
that would
strategy.
go,
Mm,
yeah, listen, these guys are actually talented. What we need to do with them is give them 2 or 3 albums to develop.
yeah.
Can you imagine
Okay.
if the Sex Pistols didn't have Malcolm McLaren? Can you imagine if Led Zeppelin didn't have Peter Green, or
Yeah.
was it Peter something, right? I mean, whoever
The
their
manager.
manager was,
Mm,
these guys would have not been what they are now.
yeah.
You need even U2. I mean, a band that's had the same manager for what 50 years.
Yeah.
And these are not. I'm not saying these are the best bands in the world, but I'm saying these bands are together because they had stability
And they had
and they
strategy.
had, yeah,
Mm,
they had a guy that was a bit older with some sort of knowledge of the record industry.
mm,
You have to realize we were, like I said, late teens, early 20s,
yeah.
and everyone was just like, yeah, you guys are good. Let's give you this one song and whatever. And then we have to go back to university. And there was, at that point in South Africa, there was no structure.
Yeah, there still
It was
isn't.
a thing. There was no money to put in these bands because, well,
No.
we're not just going to sell. And look what happened after the Outsiders left.
Yeah.
94, 95, all of a sudden you had this massive influx of really good bands that were supported by the record industry.
Yeah.
Springbok Girls, Fetish, all those bands that when I came back to visit in 2000, I could not believe, even Ashton Knight's goth stuff.
Mm.
He actually had some support from record companies.
Yeah.
Now, can you imagine if we had had that when No Friends were around, Psycho Reptiles, The Gathering, all those bands, if we had just had the support, I'm sure The Gathering would have released 2 or 3 albums.
But I
You
do
know?
think, yeah, but I do think that what the Gathering did was so foundational that bands like that you cite, whether it's the Nude Girls or whether it was Fetish, or even Ashton Knight, who came a bit later, if you hadn't done the heavy lifting that you had done as the Gathering, um, those bands would not have had the level of investment that was made because yes, you did the heavy lifting, you got people interested, and then obviously then you exited stage left, and
Yeah.
you left that space open, and it was then suddenly filled. But sadly, we sit in a situation now where that hasn't that hasn't been paid forward, as it were.
No, I get it. And unfortunately, like I said, the guys from No Friends of Harry were about 4 or 5 years older than us, so were the Psycho Reptiles. And they definitely had a better strategy than we had. Like I
Yeah,
said, we were 4 kids from Pretoria.
yeah.
I mean, what's Pretoria known for? Absolutely nothing at that point. You know, I mean, I
Government.
can understand, people would go to bars and, Pete's band Jack Hammer and bands like that, the blues-based bands,
Mm.
they would do better because it would be old people going to watch them get drunk in a bar and want them to play,
And yet, if you
Creedence
think
fucking
about it,
Clearwater Revival
yeah,
covers.
yeah, but Pretoria, by comparison to Johannesburg at the time of the gathering, the only place, and we experienced this as the outsiders, was that the only place where you could get a gig playing original music was in this highly, highly, highly conservative city called Pretoria, where you would expect the opposite to be true. So weirdly, Pretoria was this, I don't know, mini Seattle. It was this mini,
It
unexpected.
was the unknown. It
Yeah,
was the unknown. Absolutely. The only way we could get gigs where we could play, I remember, and this was not so much with the gathering because we didn't play that many gigs, but especially with the outsiders, we had to go. Remember Cherries 2 and
yeah,
all those places? We had to go to bars or little restaurants and convince the owner to
mm,
give us a night
yeah,
where we would bring in the PA and give us a month of
mm,
Wednesdays.
mm,
Now, who the fuck goes out on a Wednesday in
yeah,
Pretoria? I mean, the sidewalks roll up at 8 o'clock, you know?
exactly.
But we would have to convince this guy to give us a month. And by the end of that month, we packed the place.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And we always did
yeah.
because
Every
there were
venue.
kids, there
Yeah,
were kids there that were sick and tired of hearing, Alex J in the morning playing a bunch of bullshit that was on the top 20.
yeah,
They
and
would
Steely
listen to
Dan,
Bonnie
lots of
Simon
Steely Dan.
3 4 hours. No, but you know what I mean. They
Mm,
played the same shit on the
yeah,
radio over and over. I
yeah,
remember the first time they played The Outsiders on the radio was it was like 12, 1 in the morning on
mm,
one of these shows on Radio 5. And afterwards, the guy said, well, that sounds okay, but I don't know what that is.
yeah,
What the fuck?
yeah.
What does
But
that mean? What does
yeah,
that even mean?
yeah, yeah.
Fuck sakes.
And
You
that
know?
and that was always the issue. It was a case of
Yeah. Like,
because they couldn't define you because you weren't from there where that was made, and now you've reinterpreted it in a South African reality. That was the problem, is that they couldn't identify with you. And sadly, those people were the ones making the decisions that were going to get you
exactly.
played and get you booked for a
Exactly.
gig.
Yeah.
But
So it was just at that point I think myself and Oliver realized, and when you're that age as well, you don't have a lot of patience. You
Yeah.
know, you want things to happen quickly. And I'm still friends with Oliver. I don't know where Bunty is. I have no idea where she is.
She's out
But
there somewhere.
drummers seem to disappear all over the place. It took me
Yes,
10 years to find
there is.
Rachel.
And this
And
is a theme
obviously,
that we'll pick up on in our next
yeah,
session.
exactly. And I mean, obviously my sister is my sister, but it's I it's something that there was left unfinished. And I think with this, coming back to your question, long-winded, to finish the gathering, it would be to just take the stuff that we did
Yeah.
and put it on a piece of vinyl.
Yeah.
Even if it sells 10 copies, Jason, I don't really give a shit, right? I'm
Yeah.
too old at this point to worry about making money off music, because at this point, good luck to any band that's going to try right now, right? Just to give
Never
you an
mind
idea, for
when,
instance,
never mind when you were making the music that we're about
exactly,
to release. But
exactly. I
yeah,
mean,
it's a passion
there's
project.
no ways. I mean, I feel sorry for bands that start now. You're gonna have to slog it out on the road, and hopefully, you know, support Britney Spears or whoever, Miley Cyrus or whatever. And not to say that they're bad. I'm just saying you're gonna have to sell out in order to make money.
Yeah.
At that point, we weren't willing to sell out.
No,
We
never
were,
ever. Never ever.
and I think the other problem that we had was the record industry looked at us as a bunch of little punk kids,
Yeah.
and there was just no respect given to us. So we just thought, you know what? Here's your middle finger. We're not going to give you any respect.
Yeah.
And that kind of shot us in the foot at that point. But you know what? I just feel that it's important to release this. And if we have 5 fans left and they get that album and they're happy, that makes me happy.
Yeah. Result.
It's just you influence one person in your life positively is better than influencing 10 million negative.
Exactly.
And that's
Exactly.
just how I've always thought, and
Yeah.
that's how I raise my kids as well. As long
Oh,
as they're
awesome.
good kids, I don't care what they become.
No, awesome. I thank you, sir. We look forward to the release. Hopefully within the coming months. So watch this space. I'm excited for you. I think it's as you say, it's a cathartic journey that you're on at the moment, and I think it's one that even just selfishly will reward so many of the people who were there that actually enjoyed it at the time, but also I think tease in a curious audience as you were walking through the streets of Braamfontein and Hillbrow. And that's the fun part. That's the unknown, because that's the joy of music. And the work that you created was authentic, it was heartfelt, and it came with no agenda. And that's the joy of being able to package it, as you say, and close a particular chapter and then move on to the next, which we'll cover in our next
Yeah.
session. But thank you so
One
much.
one thing I would just like to say as well is obviously thank you to Oliver, my sister Bunty, and then Charles Kruger, who was our main guy that helped us.
He was
I
your
mean,
first band member.
without Charles, like definitely the fifth member of the band, helping us live at Thunderdome, throwing feathers and balloons from the top there and running the cameras and all that stuff. It was fun, Jason. That was the main thing for me with the gathering.
Yeah.
It was fun and exciting. And I think if more people take music like that, you'll see the end result will always be good, even if it's not good to other people.
It's
It was a
honest.
great time in my
Yeah.
life.
Yeah, but
You
it's
know,
honest. It's honest, right?
exactly.
No.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you.